Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining me tonight. I'm Laurie Geromini, the Director of Placement for Test Innovators. Welcome to our second webinar in a series of webinars that Test Innovators is offering this fall for families with children in all grade levels who are interested in learning about all aspects of the application process to independent schools. Just so you know, this webinar is being recorded, and there will be an opportunity to type in some questions at the end in the Q&A section. I'm just going to give it another minute or so more folks can join us. But I'll look forward to speaking with you about the parent and guardian role in the admissions process. Okay, I'll get started. So the first thing I wanted to talk to you all about tonight is an overview of the admissions process and when you should be doing what and sort of when it burns hot in this process. The other part of the agenda will be sort of specifically what your role is as parent and guardian. You'll be, there's sort of, you have a specific role during each part of the process. And it's important to know that you play a critical role in your child's success in school and in this process, but I'll talk more about that later. Okay, so the admissions timeline, what you should be doing now from September to November. Now, again, that can be late November or early November, it doesn't really matter. But in the next couple months, what you should be doing as a parent is researching schools. And certainly, you want to inquire, make inquiries, and you want to start to build your list. I'll talk a little bit more how to do that in a minute. This is also the time that you want to be filling out your preliminary applications, not your big final applications. It's a little bit too early to do that now. But fill out your preliminary applications if you need to in order to get through the admissions portal into scheduling an interview. You should also be starting to schedule some interviews right now. And remember that parents have to interview too. So we'll talk a little bit again about that in a minute. You should also be starting to keep a record when open houses are. That's another thing that is coming up that you'll want to attend in addition to your interviews. Also, right now, you should be registered either for the SSAT or the ISCE. You should register your child for that as soon as you can, especially if your student needs special accommodations. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer for students to that have accommodations to get through the paperwork part and get the approval, as well as find a test site that's close to their home. So I recommend getting that done if you haven't already. And also, when parents ask me how many times their child should take one of the tests, either the SSAT or ISCE, I always say to parents, definitely think about taking it twice. For students, sometimes they have a little bit more left in the tank on their second attempt. And think of the first as a really true baseline, but you definitely want to think about taking it twice. Always have those test results sent to yourself first, so you can review them before you send them off to schools in January. Also, right now, you should be practicing for your interviews as well as attending them. I did say earlier that parents should be practicing too. Attend open houses and attend visit days. If your child is a younger child in the application process, make sure you know when you have to bring your child in for a visitation. Okay, what to do next, which the next phase is really November to January. Continue interviewing at your schools, continue your visits, and demonstrate interest. Demonstrating interest, what that means is that the school records how many times you make an interest point in their school. For instance, if you go to an open house, they record that. If you go to your interview, they record that. If you attend one of the special seminars that they may have, a curriculum night, they'll record that. If you get an invitation to a theater performance, they'll record that. The reason why demonstrating interest is important right now is because it helps the school understand how authentically you are interested. And that plays a role into ultimately an admissions committee's decision, as well as test scores, application recommendations, and essays. Also in this phase, now this phase sneaks up quickly, so just be aware, you submit your recommendation forms. Usually you submit those to people. Most schools require 3 recommendations from a current math, current English, or a current guidance counselor or principal. And that's when you want to get that information out to them at the beginning of December. You may want to consider 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 submitting an extra recommendation for your child, maybe a piano teacher or a soccer coach or someone that your child works with that isn't necessarily a teacher in their school. Also during this period, you want to complete your financial aid form. Financial assistance forms are usually due in January for the next year. Also, you might want to plan on having your taxes done a little bit early in February, because sometimes schools ask for a complete tax return. And usually most deadlines are either January 15th or February 1st. I know there are some schools out there in this country that have December deadlines, but certainly you want to target January 15th as the time when you will be submitting your application, and make sure you adhere to deadlines. Sometimes late applications are not accepted. I always tell parents to plan their December break carefully, because that is a chunk of time, usually when your child is not in school. Maybe you're taking some time off from work to work on your essays, and carefully plan that break, because I know sometimes families travel, but it really is an important time to get, a last attempt at test taking, or hopefully not last minute essay writing, but it is an important time. So carefully plan that time. Okay, after. So most admission deadlines, as I said, are January 15th. However, most admissions notifications are sent to you on March 10th. Okay, so think about mid-March is the time you'll be hearing from schools, and prepare for that. Usually after schools send out their admissions materials notifications, they offer revisit day. So you'll be doing that in late March and early April. Things you want to consider at this time is transportation. Does the school offer transportation in terms of, and how long will your commute be? So your job will be to test out that commute. And also on April 6th, typically students want to know if you're going to have your child enroll or not, and be sure to let them know on a timely basis. Also during this time, you'll know if your child's been asked to be put on a wait list. And that's the time where you have to figure out, okay, am I going to stay on the wait list? Are we going to hope that a spot moves? Are we going to submit more materials so that the school knows that we're very interested in them? But that's another time, usually between March 15th or I should say March 10th and April 6th is when you're doing that. And then after you make your final decision, usually in May or June is when your child will take a placement test, and that you'll have to submit their final transcript to the school to which they're attending. Placement tests really play more into students who are applying for ninth grade. Okay, so really let's get into the nitty-gritty for a few minutes and talk about this time and what your role as a parent is. I don't want you to forget, though, parents, that this is your role will be multifaceted, and the first step as a parent is to acknowledge the challenge and beauty of the hormonal orchestra that's happening in your child's body right now, no matter what their age is. And so I want to make sure that you don't forget that and lose sight of that. For older students in the process, this time is a fantastic growth and learning opportunity that really sets up your child to take a level of ownership in. And it also, for the first time in their life, they're starting to take responsibility for the direction of their learning. Other things about older middle school students will have to think critically about what they want out of high school. And it also will, because that will set them up to get off to a fast start next year, and certainly to make the most of what their next school has to offer. So I don't want you to forget about that this is a pretty amazing time in your pre-adolescent or your adolescent child's life. There's a lot going on, and the child that's in front of you right now is going to be a completely different human being in December, in March, and certainly in June. So I just didn't want you to forget that as a parent. Usually the first thing I ask folks to do is to write your own mission statement, and this will help you build a list of schools that you may be interested in. Creating a family mission statement will help you as a family concentrate on finding the best match for your child. And again, this is what you should be doing now in September, or even if started in August, is to build that list. You want to identify key family values that will help direct you as you visit these schools. What's really important to you? What must the school have? What's nice to have? Build your list around this mission and build your list around your mission and how it compares with the school's mission and philosophy. And know as you go through this process, you're going to refine that mission and review it as you need, because your child's changing so fast. They might discover a new passion or want a program that's completely different than when you started. So just know you want to begin with the end in mind. And you want to think about, selecting the best match, and that if all the schools that you find is the best match are amongst the most competitive in the country, I suggest you have a plan B. That's really important too. Parents, and be prepared to tell your story. Everyone is different, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, but be prepared to tell your story as a family. And be transparent about your family structure. Two-family households, let them know if you're in a two-family household situation, because they do appreciate all grown-ups in a child's life attending the interview and the official visits. And if both, I shouldn't say, but if all family members can't make it to the interview, let them know, and they'll certainly be understandable. But I wanted to make sure you all knew that all family structures are recognized, and that just be transparent about that before you start. Okay, so let's get into what your roles are specifically. I always say that as a parent in this process, you have to be an office manager. Your job is to obviously start with, why are you even looking at independent school? You'll be asked that in the interview. And after you define your family's mission, you want to be able to answer, why am I looking at an independent school? What does my child need? So as an office manager, you have to be able to define why and the what. What specifically are you looking for in a school? You'll also need to, as I said, build that list, okay, and try to find the best fit or match. And there's always this argument between best fit versus best school. Be careful that you focus on the first part of that. When you focus on best school, that will put your child under a lot of pressure and yourselves under a lot of pressure. And sometimes the best fit for the child isn't always the best fit for the parents. Okay, make sure you concentrate on the first piece. Understand that you're going to be starting to have a level of partnership in your family. All of you, the student and the parents, have to be involved in some way. And as an office manager, you have to define that and what that means. Your child has to be all in on this process. It's not a process that your child can just go in at 50%. The other thing as an office manager is you have to do the research, which is what you're doing right now. You want to attend those open houses and ask the questions. A great way to find out more about schools is to ask community members. Maybe you have friends in the area with kids at the schools that you're looking at. Read online reviews, even though I don't put a lot of stock on those niche marketing. I think it's important that you ask as many people as you may know in your community with kids that attend those schools. And we know that, you're going to be asked to be a partner with these schools eventually. And so understand that you have to have a partnership within your family. And then as parents, you're going to have a partnership with the school that your child attends. Let's see. Okay, so we talked about being an office manager. Now next, your role is going to be a team captain. Again, I talked about your family having to work as a team. You have to work together, and everyone has to be engaged. And know that if you have an older middle school child going through this process, 7th and 8th graders are busy, and know that busy kids will become busier in this process. You want to keep an eye on their academic expectations at their current school and how it arcs with the demands of this process, meaning they may have to miss some school to attend interviews. They may have to be studying for the ISCE or the SSAT. So know that busy kids get a little bit busier, especially if they have commitments like dance or soccer in the evenings. They need time on weekends to draft up their essay responses. Also, as a team captain, your job is to stay positive and listen first to your child and talk second. Let them use their voice if they can, depending on their age. Your job is also to be nice. And what I mean by that is be nice to the admissions staff when you get to the school. Sometimes, I've seen parents not treat admission members, support staff, not very nice. And your job is to be nice and supportive, not only of your child, but of the people that you'll be working with. So just make sure that, you're doing that. Also, your job is as a financial planner. You want to make sure that you're thinking about the financial commitment of attending an independent school. There's sticker price versus total tuition cost. Sticker price is the tuition cost that you may see on the website, but the total tuition cost can involve things like school trips and athletic fees or class fees, books and supplies, transportation. So make sure you understand what the total tuition cost of attending per year. Does it include lunch? Do you have to bring your own lunch? These are things that are important for you to know and ask. Your job is also to think about logistics. What is the commuting time? Is there carpools available? Is there busing available? How will that affect the other kids in your family? Especially thinking about end of day. If most independent schools get out a little bit later than most public schools, and if you have other children in a public school, how is that going to affect your end of day, especially in a two working household? And then what are the expectations around homework? Plan for that. Sometimes kids have a little bit more homework than they would in public school. So do they have a space to get that homework done, and do they have time in their day? So being a team captain and a financial planner is also pretty essential to this process. Okay, next is you are a promoter and a supporter. Evaluate your child's extracurricular profile. And as a promoter, you want to be able to figure out what is 3 characteristics of your child that you want to really talk about in the application and eventually in the interview. So think about your child, that you were promoting them in a way, but not over boasting. But what are the 3 specific things besides being, a scholar? Are they also an artist? Are they also an athlete? Are they a coder? Do they love to build things? Do they love to read? But think about 3 glaring characteristics about your child that would be fun to talk about, because it's always nice to present your child with some color to their personality. I talk about being a well-rounded applicant versus a bumpy applicant. And schools always are looking for well-rounded applicants, but that's not really always true. A well-rounded applicant is a child who does well in school, who is extracurricularly involved, and has strong character. But when I was an admissions director, I looked for those bumpy kids. And what I meant was the students who bumped up in the applicant pool that had 1 or 2 really cool things about them. They had a compelling story, or they had a really compelling interest that they had evidence of, that they've displayed leadership or participation in. So there's one thing about being well-rounded, but there's also something to be said about being a bumpy applicant too. Also, your job is, there's a couple of things I wanted to talk about as a cheerleader. And when you're a cheerleader, your job is to support your child, obviously, right? And to make sure that your attitude around the best match and the best schools is consistently shown. You're not just saying you have to get into this school, you have to get into the number 1 school. You're saying to your child, we are really looking for the best match. I have a couple of don'ts that I think you should hear. And there's a few don'ts in the process, which is, don't overdo it. You don't want to overdress your child. You don't want to have them in clothes that will be too tight and they're not comfortable. They'll be walking around a campus, and you want to make sure that they're comfortable shoes and they're not wearing a tight tie around their neck. Don't over prepare them. Yes, interview practice is good, but they don't need to have 5 or 6 interview prep sessions. These admission officers love to hear kids in their authentic selves. And don't over edit your child's answers. I think it's really important. Parents always want to say, well, should I be editing my kids' essays? I think it's okay to look at them, but if the schools that require the SSAT or the ISCE, there's a writing sample in that test. And that's really what the admission officers look at, because that's your child's writing in the raw and it's unedited. So they'll compare that writing sample with the short answers in the essay that the students write, and they'll know that the parents had a play in that. So again, the writing sample from the test is a little bit more important. So don't over edit their essays, because they'll know. Also, another don't is never ever speak negatively about a school to an admissions person. And never speak to your child about another classmate's admissions outcomes. It's considered bad form and it will work against you. When I was an admissions director, I had families come in and say, this school is just terrible and this teacher is terrible. And it was a terrible experience for my child. Try and stay positive. Remember, anyone who teaches is a colleague to a teacher in another school. And so it's important to speak positively as much as you can about an academic experience, and then never speak about another child in your child's class that might be applying to the same school and what their outcome is. That's just not good role modeling, in my opinion. Another job as a cheerleader is to be an advocate for great behavior. You want your child to be the child that the teachers are writing about. And when I was in charge of an 8th grade class, I always said, be the person that you want your teacher to write about. But that goes for you too, parents. I have had students in my former school not be admitted to a school because their parents said something at the soccer sideline to a referee, and it got back to the admission office at the school to which they are applying. So my advice to parents is also be on your best behavior, and ask that of your child too throughout this process. And finally, this is perhaps one of the most important things, is to be an anchor to your child. On March 15th or whenever you receive the admission outcomes, remember your child is nervous and they're very afraid of letting you down. And they certainly would love to know that you're going to love them either way, no matter what happens, and that you're going to support them. And so it's really important to be an anchor and to make sure that they know that regardless of what happens. So that's, a little bit quick on, your role. I'm open to take questions this evening about anything that you may have. So feel free to write it into the Q&A section. And I'm happy to answer them as they come in. And I'll wait a few minutes for the questions to come in. Just a reminder, this session will be recorded, and it is being recorded, and it will be available for folks if you'd like to go back to it. Okay, a great question. What, during the school tour, what should you pay attention to besides your own behaviors? Great question. It's always, you want to pay attention to what the students are doing. Do the students, are they engaged in class? How are the teachers teaching? What size are the classes? Listen to your tour guide. If it's a parent, what are some of the things that they're saying about their child's experience? But you definitely want to keep an eye on the students and what are they involved with? Do they look happy? Do they look like they're having a good time? How are the classes being taught? Are they being taught in a discussion-based forum, or are they lecture-based? Or, you want to see what some of the projects they're working on. Look at the things on the hallways. What projects are displayed? What play are they doing? A nice thing to look at when you're on your visit is pick up the school newspaper if they have one and see what's going on there. So you definitely want to keep an eye on those things on your tour. Great question. What should the parents and kids wear at the interview? Well, I always think about to be dressed like the school's dress code, +1. So I'm always cautious about, kids wearing clothes that are too constricting. You don't have to wear a coat and tie if the school's dress code isn't a coat and tie. But if it is a coat and tie, then you should be in a coat and tie. That's what I always say. But I want kids of all genders to be comfortable, because when they're comfortable, they can do anything. But you don't want to wear jeans or sneakers to an interview. You definitely want them to be able to see your eyes. So if we have hair in the eyes, maybe think about getting a haircut. But there shouldn't be a lot of high heels. Remember, you're going to be walking and going up and down stairs. So you want to be comfortable, because as I said, when kids are comfortable, they can do anything. What are some good questions to ask during the school tour? Sure. Some good questions to ask are, tell me about a typical day. What is a typical day for you if it's a student tour guide? What are some of the things? How did the school handle COVID? Were you in session? Were you on campus? Were you fully remote? Was it a hybrid? What are some of the things that you're involved with as a tour guide? You want to ask, is there an orientation program for new students and families. If your child is joining the 7th grade, for instance, and there's only 10 new students, how does the school incorporate new students and parents into their community? That's just a sample, but you might want to ask something like that. How much weight is in the ISE essay is another question. There's a lot in that. As I said, the ISE essay or the SSAT essay is unedited writing from your child. So it's typically the first part of the exam, and it's usually the first 25 or 30 minutes. And they'll take a good look at it. They don't grade it. It's ungraded. It's just submitted along with the test scores. So that's a good thing to know, that it is part of it, because it's the only part that there isn't a grown-up influencing it. How do you practice for the interview? Well, there's many ways. You could ask a grown-up who knows your child, that isn't a family member, to maybe do some practice. Again, you don't want to over practice, but usually parents have a hard time practicing an interview with their child. So you may want to ask a teacher at the current school. We offer admissions coaching at Test Innovators, so I could do that if you're interested. I also recommend relatives. If you're at a holiday event, say, could you come over and ask my child a few questions? They have an interview coming up. So that's the best way, is not to try and do it yourselves as a parent, because sometimes it backfires if you're sitting there at the dinner table and they won't give you a true answer. Or in the car before you arrive there, that's too stressful for the student. Let's see here. Some of these questions are too high level about because they're too school specific, so I won't be able to answer them. Would I please share my insight regarding a single gender school compared to a co-educational school? Sure. This doesn't have a lot to do with the parent's role in the process, but I can take a quick crack at it. Students attending an all gender school, as opposed to sending a single gender school, keep in mind that if they're attending a single gender school, that school's done a lot of research and training in helping that gender be the best they can in the classroom. So I'll give you an example. There was a lot of study on how girls use their voices in the class and confidence. If they're in a co-educational environment, sometimes girls will not speak up or raise their hand. At a female identified school, they will maybe be feel like they're in a safer place to do that, because the teachers know how to draw that out of girls. With a gender identified male school, they may let the boys run around for 5 minutes before class starts because that's what they need. So those are just examples about the two difference. Let's see. Okay. If you know other families that are already at the school of your interest, should you mention that to admissions? That's a great question, and I used to get that a lot. Word of mouth marketing is the best way for schools to market themselves. So I think it's okay. Be careful not to over name drop. But if you know someone who currently attends the school, certainly give their name a shout out and as to why you're there. Remember, the most important thing in an interview is to let the admission officers know why you're there, and how you think their school would be a great match for your child. Some big advice I have for you out there is you may not want to talk about college placement or college matriculation in your interview, because that can be really intimidating to admission officers. I know when I was giving a 6th grade interview, when parents asked me about college placement, I said, well, let's just talk about 7th grade. That's a lot of pressure you put on a school, and I think they find that intimidating, and that can work against you. And also don't mention the fact that you've heard that their school is the best school in the country, or it's ranked #1. That really isn't a great enough reason to look at a school. And so being able to answer, why are you here? What is it about our school that interests you? And tell us about your family and what's important to you, and let's see if we're aligned. An interview is a two-way street. It's a lot of give and take. It's a discussion. For your older middle school student, they may be interviewed first for about 30 minutes, and then the parents will be brought in. For the younger middle school student, it's not as long of an interview and the questions aren't as complex. And so the parent interview might be a little bit more important. And certainly for elementary grades, the student is not interviewed, but just asked to attend a class visitation for the day, and the parents are really more interviewed. Let's see. Oh, how you can get into our assistants here at Test Innovators. I'll get to that in the next slide. What types of questions to expect in the student interview? Well, gosh, it depends on the age of the student. But when I was interviewing students for, say, ninth grade admission, I would ask them questions, tell me about a typical day in school for you. What would specifically make you pick one school over the other if you were admitted to all of them? Tell me how your COVID experience was. That's a very popular subject right now. And so having kids being able to articulate, going to school remotely and during a pandemic, what's that been like for them? Another question is, what kind of books do you like to read? That would be more for a younger student. One question I used to ask a lot would be, if I were to open up your computer to the YouTube channel, what's the last YouTube movie, or what's your last video that you watched on YouTube? What's the last song that you listened to on Spotify? If you could have dinner with someone, who would it be and why? If you had a special power, what would it be? It really has to be an age appropriate questions. Parent interviews would be, as I said, why are you here? What is it about our school? How do you incorporate new parents to your community? Things like that. Let's see. Okay. What specific questions would you ask if your child will be a day student instead of a boarding student? That's a great question. The question was, any specific questions you would ask if your child will be a day student instead of a boarding student? Well, it depends on the school you're looking at. If your school that you're looking at is both boarding and day, you may want to ask, how do the two subcultures integrate with each other? Are the boarding students just off on their own in their dorms during their free time or during their free periods? Do they eat lunch with the day students? Are the day students assigned a dorm so they can stay over at night if there's a storm or a power outage or something and they can't get picked up? How are the day students and the boarding students brought together in order for it to be a whole community? Again, culture and community is a big part of looking at a school. And so asking, how are the day students incorporated with the boarding students and vice versa, I think is a great thing to know. Let's see. Okay. So I think that's about all the questions I could answer this evening. And I do really hope this has been helpful. Let's see. For schools, I'll take one more. For schools that are religion based, if the family is interfaith, what are some advice you can give to us so the school admissions can still evaluate the students' qualifications? That's an interesting question. That's not one I get a lot. My best way to answer that is that ask the school straight out if they will recognize your religion of your family and if the student will be excused for any type of services or events. Typically, unless the school is specific in their policies, they would welcome all faiths to a school, and check and see if their assemblies are faith-based. At some schools now, their assemblies are not faith-based, even though they may call them chapel. They're more student-centered assemblies. So certainly be transparent. Ask if there's an understanding about any events or holidays that they may have to miss, or any, special accommodations for your child. But I would be fully transparent from that. And most schools can accommodate that. Yeah, I think that's about all I can answer this evening. That's appropriate for this webinar. As I said, Test Innovators is here to help by a number of ways. We designed an admissions assist course last year, and that's a course designed for parents and guardians to do alongside their children. It's self-guided. It has creative and fun exercises for you to do with your child to help them generate answers for their questions and their essay topics, and for you too, parents. Remember, you have work to do too on this application, and it will take you time. It also has videos of interviewing, so you can see how to interview and how not to interview. The course can be done easily at your own pace. It's called Admissions Assist. And the other way that we can help you is we are offering admissions coaching. I'm personally taking on a limited number of families, and you can meet with me over 10 sessions throughout now until the deadline, or you can ask for my help on a as needed basis. We do have other admissions assist coaches available too. It's sort of in the same way we have tutors available for testing. So that's what we have available. Certainly feel free to reach out. Thanks for your time tonight. I hope you learned a little bit more about your role in the admissions process and how it works and when you should be doing what. And thanks for joining us. I appreciate your time. Good night.